Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. I'm excited to have Christine Balint joining me. Hi Christine.
Hi, Jackie. It's great to be here.
So just a bit about Christine. Christine's historical novels have been inspired by the history of Italy, Ireland, France, England and Australia. And her latest book, Water Music, set in the 18th century Venetian orphanage, won the 2021 Viva la Novella Prize and was published by Barrow Books. Water Music is the story of Lucenta, a young musician who comes to the Derelitti convent in Venice to work, complete her training, and train the younger girls. And Christine will tell us a little bit more about that soon. A little bit more about Christine. So, Christine holds a PhD in creative arts from the University of Melbourne. She's a lecturer in English and creative writing at La Trobe University, and she was guest author in the television program The Art of Story and the Narrative Game. Her first novel, The Salt Letters, was shortlisted for the Vogel, the Australian Literary Award, when she was 23, and her second novel, Ophelia's Fan, was internationally published in 2004. Her work has been published to acclaim in Australia, the US, Germany, and Italy. And Christine lives in the Mornington Peninsula in Australia with her husband and two children. She's an avid reader and loves walking her dog Georgie on the beach. So thanks so much, Christine, for joining us, and just want to share my copy of Water Music. Hopefully you can see my copy. Oops, my copy there. And just want to say what a really interesting story it is.
Thank you. Well, I think the history is really fascinating.
Hmm.
So yeah, completely. I had a lot of fun researching it over many, many years. And I'm really pleased that readers are finding it interesting as well.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about it?
So yeah, Water Music is, as you said, it's the story of Lucetta. So Lucetta was she was brought up by a fisherman and his family. His wife was a wet nurse who looked after her when she was a baby. So she began her early life at the Pietà Orphanage, which was one of four musical orphanages in Venice. That had amazing musical training for girls. They were in existence from about 1300 to 1797, and they accepted girls of all different classes, and if they were seen to be gifted in music, then they were given this incredible education. But the Pietà orphanage only took they all were slightly different, and that one only took babies. And the baby would be left in a stone cradle, which was in a wall, and then the cradle would turn around, and there would be a nun
Mm,
waiting in the courtyard on the other side, who would then take that baby into the orphanage.
mm,
But obviously, when they were babies, they were not ready for education of any
mm,
kind.
mm,
So they would be sent to a peasant family, or in this case, a fisherman and his wife in a different part of Venice. Sometimes they went to a farm on the mainland or somewhere else, but I've kept Lucetta in Venice. So that was the beginning of her life. But she does have a patron who is paying for her early education, so that when she's 16, she's ready to try her luck going for a position at the Derelitti, which involves some teaching as well as continuing her own training. And then that's where we kind of meet her, is when she's about to begin her new life there at the Derelitti.
mm. And how did you find out about this part in history? Because I
So
think
I
it's
first
quite a little known thing, would you say?
That's right. And that was how I stumbled across it actually, just listening to the radio one day. They played some of Vivaldi's music, and after the music, the announcer came on and started talking about how Vivaldi had written nearly all of his music for these orphan girls who lived in the Pietà orphanage, where he had been a teacher and a composer and a conductor over many years. So that was his kind of his career. And
Mm,
I was really surprised to hear that. And it just piqued my interest straight away. And then following that, I found a music conductor in Melbourne who conducts choirs. Her name is Faye Dumont. She runs the Melbourne Women's Choir, and she has a research interest in the music that was composed for these girls. So I went and interviewed Faye, and she put me onto some reference books, and I also joined the choir, and I've been
Okay.
with them for many
Yeah.
years now,
Yeah.
and have been able to have had the great fortune to sing some of this music, and
Oh,
even to
really?
sing it in Venice
Yeah.
eventually. So it's been a great experience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. And is history something you'd always been interested in?
It is, but not in a formal sense. So I was when I was in high school, I did become interested in history as a subject, but I certainly didn't. I didn't stick with it for very long as a area of study, because at that time history was very much about remembering dates and names, and I found that difficult. That wasn't really my strength, and I was too worried that I wouldn't do well in it. And also, I found it fairly dry as well. A lot of the content, the traditional history content, was not so exciting to me. But so I kind of fell into it by accident later on, and I've certainly become intrigued by less known aspects of history, often women's history that we are uncovering now, that hasn't so much been talked about and taught over the last few centuries. So that has been what has drawn my attention, and often the primary source documents. So trawling through archives and seeing what I can find, and
Mm.
that does make the stories a lot more immediate,
Mm.
and it really makes it feel real. I think that's the difference for me between reading a textbook and being in an archive, is when you can see that handwriting and touch the same paper that those people were touching.
Yeah.
It comes to life a
Yeah.
lot more.
Yeah.
Mm.
And is there anything like in any of your books that you'd like to share with us that maybe you found when you were researching that really surprised you?
Oh gosh. Um, oh, I mean, there's always something. There are always aspects that are unexpected. I
Mm.
mean, I suppose the whole history of these orphanages. I mean, it surprised me right from the get go that
Yeah.
there were these opportunities for women to have an education like this that wasn't available in other parts of Europe, and
Mm.
in fact that it wasn't actually class dependent. So
Mm.
a girl off the streets, who was from a very poor background and had no parents, but if she was musical, all kinds of opportunities could be opened up to her through this. So that was probably my kind of big overarching, surprising moment.
Yeah. And it was nice to hear that some good things did happen in orphanages, because you always
That's
hear all
right.
these terrible things that happened. And yeah.
Exactly. And of course, it was a mixed, experience, and
Mm.
I'm sure there were challenges as well. But many of the girls were so disadvantaged already that,
Mm.
it really did lift their opportunities. They were the other, so in Venice at this time, the noble families usually could only afford to marry one or two of their daughters off, because of the dowries being so expensive.
Mm.
So in a family, if there were more than two daughters in an aristocratic family, if there were more than two daughters, then the two would be selected pretty much in early childhood. No, those two are the most attractive. We'll make sure they find a good match.
Mm.
And then the others would be labelled as unmarriageable as small
Mm.
children. And that idea really fascinated me as well, and horrified me, because imagine that, having that label from early childhood, knowing that you're the one that is not considered marriageable. um,
Yeah.
so that was pretty interesting as well, to see that, so girls often from those classes also could have this kind of education, and
Mm.
build a different kind of life
Mm.
for themselves.
Mm. And could you tell me, how did you get into writing? Is it something that you always thought you would do, or?
Yeah, so I was interested in it from childhood, and I remember writing a story when I was in about grade one, about a ghost, going for a walk, and all these people, he passed all these people, and they kind of they got a fright and they screamed and ran away, and he was really
Mm,
upset. And then he went to a park, and they had a lake, and he saw his reflection and he screamed and ran away. And that was my story when I was quite young.
mm,
Um, and so I was always kind of scribbling something. And then in high school, I started sending off short stories to competitions and things. And then yeah, I did an arts degree, so I specialised in English. There wasn't a lot of creative writing study available within an English degree at that time. There is now, but there
mm,
wasn't back then. But I did a
yeah.
little bit. But I mean, obviously, studying literature is a great foundation for writing as well. And then I was very fortunate. My first novel was shortlisted for the Vogel, as you mentioned before,
Mm,
and that meant that it became published
mm,
by
mm.
Allen and Unwin at that
Yeah.
time.
And we've got quite a few people watching, so just wanted to remind people watching, if you have a question for Christine, please type it in comments and I can read it out. I've got a couple of questions for you that have come through. Sharon wonders what you like to read and if you've got any recommendations for us.
Oh, well, I do. I try to read really widely, but of course, I do love reading historical fiction as well
Mm,
as writing it, and probably for the same reason that we learn about the history, in an interesting way through narrative, rather than kind of in a dry, disconnected way. So I did really love Maggie O'Farrell's Hamnet. That is a recent book that I found fascinating. So drawing on what the little bit that is known from the records about Shakespeare's family, and then a lot of imaginative development that's gone into that. And
mm,
yeah, very beautifully written. I've also enjoyed a lot of Geraldine Brooks's writing, and most recently I did love Horse.
mm,
So it's history, but it's also very contemporary in some
yeah.
ways and dealing with issues that are very relevant
Mm.
at this moment in time.
Mm. No, thanks
Mm.
for those recommendations. Kelly says it's just an interesting time. Love historical fiction and how things have changed so dramatically. She wonders which historical period intrigues you the most.
Well, I do usually I become interested in the story itself, and then so
Mm,
I begin with the story, and then I will go into that kind of context. But when I look closely, I haven't actually moved around that much. They all seem the three projects that you talked about, the Salt Letters and Ophelia's Fan and Water Music. So they're all set in different places, and it seemed like different times. But then when I looked closely, I think the Salt Letters was the 1850s. Ophelia's Fan begins around 1800 and goes to
mm,
1850. So we've got Australia, England, then we've got Ireland, and France, and England. But again, like within 50 years, and then now I've gone 1790s, which is not so much into the century
yeah.
before. So probably really 19th century and 18th, I'd say.
Mm, mm,
That's where I've gone so far in terms of research. But I wouldn't kind of block anything out. I mean, I think it'd probably be a bigger imaginative leap for me to go a lot further back in time.
yeah.
I think I'd have to really, I'd have to do some serious research to get a feel for what that might have looked like the life, I suppose,
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah, well, what about this question? If you could go back in time, is there a time that you would want to go to, or maybe an event in history that you really would like to be at?
I think I'd like to I think the 19th century would be really interesting,
Mm,
particularly, and I mean, I haven't written about this specifically, but with I guess some of the scientific, I guess, discoveries
mm,
and voyages and things that were happening
mm,
around the 19th century. That interests me. That kind of that real growth of science that was happening at that time.
mm.
I think it'd be interesting to be a fly on the wall in some of those conversations
Yeah,
between scientists
yeah,
around that period.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Kelly's got another question. She wonders if you have a favourite historical fiction author, or maybe a book that inspired you to write this genre.
Ah. That's difficult. I probably got a couple of, there are probably two authors, well, probably more than two, but
Mm.
two historical fiction authors whose work I will read pretty much everything when it comes out.
Yeah.
Because, and I love their work partly because in the same way that I do, they jump around in terms of topic and story and location, setting, all of that. So it means that, you know, each book is quite discreet, and you know, it's always a fascinating journey to go wherever they're going to take you. And so one of those authors is probably Geraldine Brooks, who I mentioned earlier.
Mm.
And I really enjoy Tracy Chevalier's work as well. And she also has a very kind of broad span of history that she works with, and different, you know, different places and
Mm.
times. And
Mm.
it's always exciting to see where she goes next.
Mm. And you mentioned earlier that you were writing when you were young. Did you have someone who really encouraged your writing?
Look, certainly my English. Well, when I was in primary school, within the family, I was very encouraged. I was an
Mm.
only child, and I remember, you know, my mum would be. I was terribly, you know, it's very traditional family roles, and my mum would be ironing, and I'd be sitting there, at the coffee table, often making up my stories. So there was certainly encouragement within the family, and then in high school, a lot of my teachers did. A lot of them were having to, I would give them stories to read and things. Poor things. I'm
Mm.
now married to an English teacher, so I
Oh.
imagine that they didn't need the extra work, but they
Yeah.
were very gracious, and they would, you know, read them and give me feedback, you know, things that were not just too hard, you know, what we had to do in the classroom. But
Mm.
so certainly I had encouragement there.
Mm. Mm. And what are you doing at the moment? Are you working on something new?
Yeah, so I'm quite a few drafts into another project, which I actually found while I was researching border music, so sort of towards the end. And it's actually a real life court case that happened in Venice in the 1700s. The actual events of the court case occurred in a little village in the countryside, a few hours from Venice, the city.
Mm.
Um, but then, yeah, the court case was involved the Council of Ten, which was their court system at the time. So I was very fortunate to be able to go over and trawl through some court documents, and to kind of, yeah, try and get a sense of the places as well,
Mm.
and kind of, yeah, visit the village where these
Mm.
things happened.
Mm. And is
Mm.
that something that you find common, that you're researching something and something else comes up that you think, oh, that's going to make a great story?
That's probably the first time it's happened.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. You never know where that idea is going to come from, and I'd say, yeah, this time it came from, yeah, just a history book that I found in the library, but I was reading
Mm.
it at a time. I was reading because it was relevant also to water music.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
And what do you hope readers will love about your books?
Well, I hope that they, I mean, I try to make them as evocative as I can, to give you a sense of what it might have been like to live in that place, to have those experiences. Of course, we can't really know for sure what it
Mm.
was like.
Mm.
But, you know, to have a sense of what it might have been like, and also, you know, a bit of an escape, and a bit of a different kind of experience from the day to day
Mm.
that we're living, I suppose.
Mm. And I'm interested to know, in water music, did you find any letters or writing from any of the people who actually were in the orphanage?
No, so I did spend a lot of time in the archives, but the archives in, well, like, I don't know in all of Italy, but certainly in Venice,
Mm.
it was quite a different sort of experience from what you would have researching in a library here, where you might, you know, look in the catalogue online and then order the material, and then they bring it out. In Venice, the people at the Derelitti, so there is an archive there. I think it's no longer open to the public, but fortunately it was at that time. And they were really, really generous. So they were very happy to have me there working, and very, very trusting.
Mm.
But it was a pile of boxes. And
Mm.
they kind of just said, here are the boxes,
Mm.
see what you find.
Mm.
So I didn't find anything specifically written by them, but there were a lot of letters concerning the girls. So, there would be petitions. The girls would write letters to the governors asking to be allowed to go on summer holiday with a family for their health. So, they did have some nice experiences too. There were petitions to marry. So young men, often aristocratic men, would decide, they would fixate on one of the girls who they had seen through the grill from a great distance, and they would decide, that's the one I want to get married to. And they would write letters, which were often rejected actually by the nuns, but that was all in their those applications. There were some sonnets. Actually, some of these young men wrote sonnets about the girls too.
Really?
And certainly the nuns kept very meticulous records about, what, particularly budget-related records about food and supplies, that kind of thing. So that was, that was mostly what the material was in there. And the buildings, of course, are still there. So that was amazing to be able to walk through.
And do you have a favourite place to write?
Well, no is the short answer to that question. I'm most productive not working at home.
Okay.
But I've obviously had to learn to work from home, as most of us have through the pandemic and things. I mean, I wouldn't say I don't like working at home, but I feel like I do probably get more done when I'm not here. So I guess I have a few other tricks to help me be more productive. So putting music on, and I'll have, particular music that I feel kind of suits the tone, or that somehow transports me. And that actually can also, it does something in terms of if you come to associate a particular piece of music with what you're working on, it makes it quicker to jump back in when you've had to do other things and you've had a break and you can't remember what you were doing. But if you put that music on and open the file, somehow that it comes together and you can get your mind back to where it needs to go.
Yeah. And you said you don't usually like writing at home. What sort of places do you like writing at then?
Well, I just actually, I've got a friend up the road this is a little bit strange, but she has a kind of a church in her backyard.
Okay.
And this church, it has many functions, but I do sometimes go there and work, use it as a studio, and that's amazing to work there. It has a lovely view out over the kind of mountains and the trees, and so that's a great spot. But more commonly, I'll be, just for convenience, I'll be in a library or in a cafe or something like that. But with my headphones on, so that I'm, focused on my own thing. And that's that usually works quite well.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with me. Is there a way that people can keep in touch with you?
Absolutely. So I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram, and obviously on Facebook too. So Christine, variations of Christine Balint writer, Christine Balint author. I'm easy to find on both of those platforms.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who joined in and asked some questions.
Thanks so much, Jackie.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
See you later.